Until the End, Part 4. Lyra had gone over to Bonbons' home to talk to her in private. The conversation started off as petty gossip and chattering, but the night was starting to get late, and Lyra was tired of playing around at this point, deciding it was time to make her move. Bonbon, we've been best friends for how long now? She asked her avidly. Since we were just fillies at school, Bonbon confidently answered, oblivious as to where Lyra was taking the conversation. Right, and you've always been there for me when I needed a friend. You're some pony I know I can trust, Lyra complimented. We help each other out all the time. You were there to comfort me after my breakup with Caramel. It's what BFFs do, Bonbon happily announced. Ugh, what an asshole, Lyra growled, thinking back to the heartless, merciless breakup, but Bonbon just giggled. I can still remember the jokes you used to make to cheer me up, and how you always said that Caramel and Bonbons weren't a good mix, she recounted fondly. Lyra smiled and also let out a light-hearted giggle. Yeah, I'd always prefer mint and nougat personally, Lyra chuckled. She'd almost forgotten how hard she'd tried to make Bonbon smile if she was unhappy. She never understood how Bonbon couldn't see past the friendly gesture, though. Lyra always made the effort to be there, not just because they were best friends, but because she'd always had a deep-seated love for her. And she'd always kept quiet for the sake of preserving their friendship, but until now, she'd never wanted to share her feelings so much. She didn't care how it turned out. The strain of holding in her feelings for much longer was hardly bearable, and she needed to know how her friend could feel about her if she at least tried to love her back. But she couldn't just come out and rush everything. Instead, she planned out a smooth, slow approach to coax her into the intensifying conversation. You know, I've been through a few breakups before, but I've never seen you with a stallion, no? Don't you have a very special son pony? Bonbon asked, curious as to how her friend went by for so long without a love interest. Lyra grinned as her first triumph presented itself earlier than expected. Bonbon herself had opened a door right to the heat of where Lyra had planned to get to. Just play it slow, Lyra, she thought to herself. Well, I've never really found any pony else worth my time, you know. My schedule's always full. I'm either sleeping or I'm with you. Don't really need a schedule, but that's my weekly plan, Lyra replied, instantly wondering if she shouldn't have blurted all of that out, though. She gritted her teeth in frustration with herself, but subtly tried to act like she meant to say it. You know, I love having you around, and you always brighten up the mood. But if there is some pony interest in you, don't let our friendship get in the way. I'm sure I can survive some time without you if I need to, Bonbon said, smiling, hoping she wasn't a constant obstacle in her friend's affairs. Lyra gulped, wondering how she should reply. But she started to break into a sweat, knowing the conversation would soon reach its peak. What if she doesn't feel the same way? She kept thinking, as she tried to think of ways to answer. Lyra dismissed the negative assumptions and continued to reply. I guess I'm just not that into stallions, Lyra said, before realising what conclusion that would lead Bonbon to. She resisted the urge to smack herself in frustration. Way to jump the gun, Lyra. Bonbon instantly jumped to a conclusion, just as Lyra had predicted. So you're into mares? She asked, confused. Lyra's heart started pounding. The conversation was going where she wanted it to, but not how she wanted it to. She quickly attempted to recover herself. No, well, yes, I mean, maybe. Oh! She blurted out in frustration that she was letting her fears get the best of her. They were perfectly reasonable fears. After all, she didn't want to lose her best friend, nor make things awkward between them. But it was really hard to be subtle when she kept blurting out everything on her mind. Bonbon could see her friend was getting nervous and gave a light-hearted laugh. Lyra You don't need to be so worried. I don't care if you're a filly fiddler. Every pony has a preference. Lyra gulped again, praying to Celestia that she wouldn't ask. So who's the lucky mare? Is she a friend of ours? Bonbon asked. Buck. Lyra cursed in her head. She was lost for words now, but whatever she said from this point, there was no turning back. She had to put her heart on the line. With an unsettled look across her face, Lyra set her mind prepared speech to action. So, you don't care at all I'm into other mares? You don't think I'm weird or unnatural? Lyra asked in order to find out the first important aspects of the information she needed. How her friend would react towards her sexuality if the love wasn't shared. No, of course not. Nothing like that would ever make me think any less of you. Besides, I actually think it's kind of cute. Bonbon giggled, not realising that she'd given Lyra a much brighter turnout than what she'd originally assumed. It was time for her to lay down the big question. She just had to think of a mood to act to boost her approach. Maybe the seductive approach, Lyra thought as she took in a large breath and readied herself. You know, you're the only mare I really hang out with, right? Lyra asked. Yeah, but come on, Lyra. It's not like I'm the mare of your eye. Bonbon joked before noticing her BFF's descending expression. Right? Bonbon asked, suddenly sprouting an apparent concerned look across her face. Lyra forgot everything she'd just been thinking of and frowned in horror. She was rendered completely speechless, and judging from the look across Bonbon's face, she assumed was about to be heartbroken. In a desperate attempt to save herself, she tried to get out another sentence, but failed, with only unintelligible, stuttered mumbles coming out. Oh my gosh. Lyra, I never knew. That's how you felt. I mean, me. How long have you felt like this? Lyra was now sweating like a waterfall, unable to think of anything but how hard her heart was going to be squashed when her best friend didn't feel the same way. It was a hopeless battle with her own mind to try and think of ways to respond. Instead, in an attempt to try and save herself, Lyra decided maybe abandoning the idea altogether would bring her less pain. You know what? Maybe it'd be best to just call it a night. I'll just... Lyra was talking so fast that it came out sounding like utter gibberish, but Bonbon interrupted her, intent on hearing her out her friend's feelings. No, Lyra. Tell me, Bonbon said quickly to her stressed friend. Oh, this is so much more awkward than I thought it would be, Lyra thought to herself, wishing she could have just kept her feelings to herself. Whatever she may have thought about the outcome of her actions had been completely disregarded. I think it might be better if I don't. This is going to make things awkward enough anyway, Lyra said, shifting nervously. Bonbon knew this must have been a stressful thing for her friend to go through, but after everything they had been through together, there was no way she was going to ditch her over a love interest. Lyra, I don't care about your sexuality. We're still best friends. I just don't understand. Why me? Bonbon asked, intrigued to know what it was about herself that was taking her friend's fancy. Lyra perked back up a bit and became less mortified, but still felt rather embarrassed. You really want to know? You don't care that I'm a lesbian? Lyra asked, confused and expecting a totally different outcome. Of course not. We've been best friends for far too long for me to care about something like that. Tell me, Bonbon pleaded again. Lyra suddenly sprung an idea. Charm her, then go for a seductive approach. I can still pull this off. Don't screw this up, Lyra, she instructed herself in her head. She wanted to be with Bonbon, and she had one window presented to turn things her way. Well, you've always had this thing about you since we became friends, I guess. I looked at you differently to almost every pony else in my life. And I guess the fact that you're the only one I ever talked to for pretty much my whole life played a big part of the feeling. You were the only one I could trust, and the feeling just kept developing. Laura began wondering, though, if she'd started off sounding too corny. Bonbon, oddly enough, didn't feel very awkward in this scenario. She felt completely flattered. If only even half the ponies I dated had something like that, Bonbon said, smiling. They hardly ever notice if I've changed my hair. Charm her, Lyra's brain commanded. That's because to them it didn't mean anything. They didn't deserve you. For someone to be with you, they need to love you enough to deserve you, and feel proper love for you. Like I do, Lyra said, running what she just said through her head again, just to make sure it sounded right. You think you're the one for me, do you? Bonbon asked, giving her friend a seductive tease for a reply for fun, not realising she had just opened another huge door for Lyra. Well, you know I'd treat you right, like some pony should treat some pony they love. I'd do what I always do, make sure you're smiling, and if you're not, try harder, Lyra said, getting the first C's of her window, readying her next comment to make an approach towards Bonbon, if it came out right. Bonbon began to wonder why her friend's compliments weren't making her edgy, considering it was almost blatantly obvious that she was attempting to win her over. Is there any pony on your mind? I mean, what's stopping us from trying? Lyra asked, making sure to keep her seductive tone apparent, taking a couple of steps closer to Bonbon, but then stopping a few feet away. Bonbon started to feel a little concerned, but not because she was worried her friend was making a mistake, but because she had no urge to stop her. She started to question in her head whether this was her conscience telling her to spare her friend's feelings, or that some previously unknown feelings were coming into play on her part. She tried to combat them quickly. Well, I don't want things to get awkward between us. I don't want to lose you as a friend, Bonbon said. She didn't think she was ready for something like a lesbian relationship, and was anxious about it being lovingly involved with her lifelong best friend. Bonbon, I don't want to lose you either, but I don't think we'd have to worry about that. Best friends are meant to argue, but we've never fought in our lives. Why would it be any different if we were in love with each other? Lyra asked, taking a couple of steps closer. She was at the spot she'd been hoping to reach. Having felt the way she did all her life, Lyra had been putting time into focusing on things Bonbon liked, and made sure that she had the knowledge she needed to get anywhere the night would take her. Bonbon was taking note of her friend's advance, but she didn't stop her, nor did she show any signs of moving away. She started to wonder if she was really against the concept of this relationship at all. I just don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of things that would be missing for me in this type of relationship, Bonbon considered. Like what? You'd be surprised at what I can offer, Lyra said, moving in yet again closer, gaining back all of her lost confidence and readying herself for a chosen approach. She started taking note of the way Bonbon was reacting to her actions, and was starting to narrow down to her conclusion. She'd studied a little body language in books, and Bonbon was starting to display the first signs that she was becoming aroused by what was happening. She was unsure, but unable to prevent anything from progressing, so Lara decided to take advantage of that and roll with it. Bonbon started to sweat a little, questioning further more how she really felt about her friend. She had never felt relationship-worthy love for her, but something about Lara's behaviour was bringing out a much deeper feeling that she wasn't sure she wanted to succumb to. I guess Bonbon tried to think of one thing that couldn't be offered in a lesbian relationship, but never being in one personally didn't bring much to mind. The only thing she could think of was pleasure, and how the anatomy of a mare may detract from any sexual enjoyment. But she didn't want to tell Lyra that because, well, but she didn't really have to. Lyra had guessed that would be the first thing on her mind, and attempted one-shot move to hook her in, putting her on the spot. "You're worried about pleasure, aren't you, Bonbon?" Lyra asked, smiling seductively as she said it, throwing her line out. "Afraid I won't be able to make you feel the same way as a stallion can?" Lyra asked, staring deep into Bonbon's eyes, and talking in the same tempting voice as before, but putting in no effort to not sound like she was making fun of her at any point. As she spoke, she dared a slow stroke of Bonbon's curly deep blue mane, leaning in close before backing off again. Bonbon's heart was starting to beat faster, and her sweating had increased to an almost uncomfortable level. Something was happening with her body that she'd only ever experienced when around the stallion. But it was different in the way that she was seemingly excited about it. As much as she was afraid to admit it to herself, Bonbon may have found returned feelings for Lyra that had just been hidden away from her. Well, I just... Bonbon stammered before Lyra stopped her, putting her hoof on her mouth. Lyra was close to being able to seal the deal, and she could tell. She had to follow through with the approach, though, and properly arouse her. If that worked well, she'd possibly get much further than she'd hoped she would. Don't be worried about something like that. Just because I may not have certain body parts doesn't mean I don't know what feels good to a girl, Lyra began, lightly toiling with the pink highlights in her friend's hair. She was pushing all the right buttons so far, and took note of everything that was happening, to figure out what might excite Bonbon more. Bonbon was now lost for words, though. Her breathing was getting heavy, and she was having trouble hiding it. But it wasn't a scary feeling. It was a good one. No stallion had ever made her feel this good, but she still wasn't entirely convinced, and had something else on her mind that she wanted to address before anything would go further. "What about foals?" Bonbon blurted out, taking Lyra by surprise. "I want a baby of my own too, Lyra. How would that possibly work?" Bonbon asked. Lyra wasn't stumped for more than a few seconds, though, before she was confidently able to answer. "You could always adopt," Lyra replied, grinning and trying her luck at another stroke of Bonbon's mane. But Bonbon shunned her head lightly, and Lyra took her foreleg back. "You don't understand. I want to be a natural mother." Bonbon explained. Lyra had already thought of a solution to this too. "Sperm donation?" "There's literally a way to solve anything nowadays," Lyra suggested, retrieving some of Bonbon's lost attention. "Let me be the other parent. I could be just as, if not more reliable than any stallion in Equestria," Lyra begged, making a successful stroke across Bonbon's mane. Bonbon considered everything that Lyra had laid out to her, but one thing still troubled her. What about every pony else? No pony gives filly fiddlers the respect they give another. I'm just not sure how I'd cope with constant discrimination," Bonbon explained. "But why would you even care what another pony thinks? If you're in love with some pony, why should it matter what others think?" Lyra told her, a little confused and disheartened that Bonbon may put her reputation before love. But she kept her expression and tone, noticing significant change in Bonbon's body language, suggesting that she was just getting more and more into what was happening. Bonbon couldn't deny that Lyra had an answer for everything, and the fact that she hadn't dropped the sexy tone and look since the conversation had gotten intimate only started to make her feel more aroused. No stallion that she had dated had ever managed to make her feel this turned on with just looks and suggestive activity, and it was starting to show. As Lyra continued staring deep into her eyes and stroking her mane, she would convulse with each shiver Lyra's touch sent down her spine. Everything that Lyra was doing to her body was working wonders, but she didn't understand how something as simple as a touch could excite her so much. Lyra leaned into her ear to whisper something to her. "Just give me a chance, and I'll prove that this can work," Lyra whispered very suggestively in Bonbon's ear. Bonbon felt her body start to shake in excitement. Her legs started to feel like jelly. Lyra purposely nuzzled behind Bonbon's ear with her nose, or softly rubbing her hooves around her body as if massaging her. Lyra purposely rubbed other spots of Bonbon's body more deeply where she knew would bring a form of pleasure to her. Bonbon let out a moan of absolute delight from the feeling being created all around her body, but realizing she may be giving in to Lyra's efforts like temptation. She attempted to keep her mouth shut by biting her lip, but other parts of her body weren't so controllable. As she began to succumb to Lyra's efforts, Bonbon's muscles relaxed, and she began to feel a moist feeling around her marehood. She'd never actually been in any situation where her body would do what it was doing, but she had no hopes that the feeling would stop. The muscles around her moistening clit were all reacting in different ways as she became more aroused, and the outer skin started to feel odd, in the way that it was soft but erect into her open vagina, while the inner muscles started to follow up the body motion by protruding the pink, wet flesh beneath it. Just the feeling was putting Bonbon in a state of pure bliss. She felt embarrassed that this was happening. So was I. She'd never been sexually aroused properly before, and found it hard to believe that it was her lifelong best friend causing it. She tried to conceal her pelvic region as best as possible to avoid embarrassing herself further, but Lyra had already surveyed the fruits of her handiwork. She picked up on the overall scent Bonbon was giving off, from the mix of her usual sweet scent, sweat and moist natural lubrication now surrounding her hairhood, and from Bonbon's expressions and reactions to some of the way she toyed with her and touched her body, that she hadn't been in this sort of situation before. "You don't need to hide yourself, Bonbon. You clearly like what's happening, so why fight it?" Lyra whispered, bringing her own lips hardly an inch from Bonbon's. Oh. Bonbon trembled as Lyra's voice sent chills of sexual delight down through her body. She started to consider that she might be ready to take a drastic step into something new, and found it extremely hard to deny that she was in a very undeniably horny state. Bonbon stared right into Lyra's eyes, waiting for her to make a move, being close enough to nuzzle each other's noses. Right when Bonbon closed her eyes, waiting for the action that could change her life, but Lyra began to feel that it might not be right to take advantage of Bonbon just by getting her aroused. Nothing would be special for either of them if she didn't want it, and she knew there was no going back now, that they were this far into everything. Taking Bonbon by surprise, Lyra slumped back away a bit and put a hoof on Bonbon's shoulder. "Just tell me first, do you want this?" Lyra asked, staring deeply into Bonbon's eyes. Bonbon was now in a rather awkward position now. She knew that Lyra wanted her to say yes, and she was getting keener on the idea, but she was lost for words, and she respected that Lyra gave her the choice, but didn't have to think for very long. Bonbon made up her mind. She was ready to try something new, and she believed Lyra wasn't the type of friend that would let her down. Bonbon completely caught Lyra off guard, pulling her into a deep kiss. Lyra was stunned for the first few seconds, but upon realizing that her hopes had become reality, she'd become absolutely delighted. They connected passionately and became quickly enthralled in the moment. Aww. Their lips moved in unison to suit the other's, meeting the same level of intensity, igniting more purity in the blazing romance. Blooming between the pair, their tongues met and danced around each other, marveling in the unspoken connection shared in the incredible kiss. Lyra gently started to move over towards the couch, ushering Bonbon with a tap and pulling her along with her. She didn't dare break the kiss, though. It was far too much of a precious moment to abruptly end. Upon reaching the couch, Lyra pulled Bonbon close into her forearms, without even momentarily disturbing the intense passion in her kiss. Lyra lifted one hoof to the cushion of the couch and pulled them both off one by tossing them behind Bonbon, aligning them into a sizable bed shape, before moving Bonbon backwards, gently towards them. She returned her hooves to the sensitive areas of Bonbon's back and began to massage them, again exciting Bonbon, even more relaxing any nervous tension the conversation had been causing. Suddenly, in one swift motion, Lyra swept Bonbon off her hoofs, spinning her around and catching her quite quickly, breaking the kiss just for a moment. Bonbon seemed a little startled at first, but smiled and continued kissing Lyra, who slowly laid Bonbon onto the plush makeshift bed of cushions. Lyra never wanted that kiss to end, and clearly from the amount of enthusiasm returned on Bonbon's part, she was too enraptured in the romantic embrace. But Lyra was keen for things to progress. As she laid herself gently on top of Bonbon, she could feel her wet marehood starting to moisten hers. She pulled back momentarily and moved her mouth to Bonbon's ear. "Now let me show you what I can offer you pleasure-wise," Lyra whispered into Bonbon's ear, elicting an excited shiver and gasp from Bonbon. Lyra had started to slowly slide her way down Bonbon's body, lightly kissing her chest and abdomen. On the way down to her destination, Bonbon's legs were elevated more and more as she became more excited with Lyra's descent. Lyra stopped at Bonbon's wet fur around her moistening neck, and to get a few early moans, tickled the fleshy pink labia protruding from her vagina with her tongue. Oh, for fuck's sake. Just that simple act sent shivers of pleasure coursing through Bonbon's body like electric shocks. She let out a gasp as the tickling started to bring even more fluid to her already dripping marehood. Oh, for fuck's sake. Lyra had some extensive knowledge about other mares and other sensitive points, and was quite prepared for the next part of her plan. Lyra kissed the flesh around the inside of Bonbon's thighs, and worked her way into the middle, while rubbing Bonbon's flank around her cutie mark, receiving light moans of enjoyment from Bonbon. Lyra began to concentrate more on Bonbon's marehood, licking her outer labia, relishing in the taste of her juices flooding through her coat. If Bonbon had been lost for words before, she was now rendered beyond speechless by what was happening. It was everything amazing, confusing and perfect at the same time, and even if she did have anything to say, it would have never made its way from her lips, unless it could combat the loud coos and ardent moans that were ever so constant in the sexual pleasure she was experiencing. But she didn't even think it could get any better until Lyra started to nuzzle deeper into her folds. Lyra lapped up the juices, started to flow from the soft inner folds of Bonbon's vagina, marvelling in her sex juices, causing herself to become moist as she continued the sex act. She explored Bonbon's vagina to the best extent her tongue could get, and if it was exciting Bonbon enough, she dug her nose in further to get deeper. She knew a particular spot just at the top of her that would surely have Bonbon screeching in pleasure. But she wanted to build the pleasure up first, instead of rushing it. Lyra noticed Bonbon was slowly reaching climax point by the gain in intensity and increasingly more frequent moans, and decided it was time to give her a big finish. While continuing to lick at her wet fleshy pink folds, Lyra began to move out of Bonbon's vagina, and moving her tongue up to the small round nub-like area underneath the thin flap of flesh. Just the feeling of Lyra tickling it with her tongue sent jolts of electric pleasure through every vein in her body. Bonbon's legs were high in the air, and she was beginning to thrust her hips into Lyra's face as the pleasure built. Lyra continued licking at the spot, occasionally sticking her tongue under the flaps of the skin and licking it very fast before returning to the centre and sucking on Bonbon's pleasure point. Bonbon was thrusting like crazy as she approached her climax, even pushing Lyra's head deeper into her wet folds to speed up the process. Desperate to escalate the feeling to a maximum pleasure, she kept one hoof on Lyra's head while using the other to rub at the wet fur at the top of her clit, as furiously as she could without hurting herself. Lyra licked as much of Bonbon's clit as she could before the inevitable climax and readied herself for it, realising that Bonbon probably wouldn't end up controlling her first orgasm very well. Bonbon started to screech instead of moaning and was sweating like crazy. She was panting harder and harder, rubbing the top of her wet vagina as fast as her arms would allow. It was only seconds away now. Bonbon could feel it coming. Lyra could tell just as much, feeling the walls of Bonbon's vagina starting to contract. "Lyra, I think I'm about to... Ah!" Bonbon let out one final loud screech of pure amazing pleasure as her muscles started to contract and the gooey white fluid of her orgasm flushed out. Lovely. Lyra could feel the change as Bonbon's whole body convulsed with the feeling and closed her eyes to avoid the juices about to flood around her. That didn't stop her from lapping up some of the licky liquid anyway, savouring in the results of her efforts. Well done, Lyra. Bonbon, still feeling the stiffness in her legs from her first orgasm, started to feel her legs lower around Lyra's head. She was panting for air that she had lost in her final massive screech, and was finding it almost impossible to move as her muscles relaxed from the strain of putting so much into helping Lyra reach her goals for her. Lyra's raised her face from Bonbon's messy white vagina, wiping the sex juices of her face on the cushion to the side of Bonbon's body. Oh. For one more little added tickle of pleasure, Lyra lit up her horn with a small spark and tapped it on the top of Bonbon's clit, sending another massive surge of orgasmic stimulation through Bonbon's body. Bonbon felt her whole body go numb with pleasure, and more fluid started to dribble out of her soaking wet marehood. Oh, dirty bastards. Lyra, quite proud of her efforts, allowed herself to find rest and gather some much needed air from only having been able to breathe at small intervals. She laid herself gently on top of Bonbon and kissed her cheek. How was that?" Lyra asked, panting for air. Bonbon couldn't respond though, being caught up in the pleasure and worn out feeling the orgasm had left her in. Instead, she responded by bringing Lyra's lips to her own and stroking her mane. Lyra parted the connection for just a moment. "I'll stay with you till the end, I promise," Lyra said, kissing Bonbon again. Aww. Before Bonbon broke the kiss to reply. "And I'll stay with you till the end, together forever," Bonbon replied, staring deep into Lyra's unbreakable gaze. "Together forever," Lyra replied, pulling Bonbon into the most meaningful, heartfelt hug either of them had ever experienced in their lives.